Hi folks, Marco Vigliotti from iPolitics here. I want to walk you through one of my newest stories that's up on the website right now. It's about government legislation known as Bill S-2. So this is a bill that was initially conceived as a response to a court ruling back in 2025. Back in the mid 1980s, the government made some changes to the Indian Act around who was allowed to receive status. So at the time, Indigenous peoples who wanted to own land, vote, or enjoy other rights had to give up their status. This was a process known as enfranchising. It was ended in those changes to the legislation into the 1980s. However, people whose descendants had been enfranchised were not able to receive status and weren't able to pass it down to their relatives. So the court ruling in 2025 said this is not compliant with the charter. Something needs to change. We'll give you 10 months to make those changes. The government quickly introduced Bill S-2. It was already kind of something they were working on. I shouldn't say kind of, because in its initial form was virtually identical to something introduced under the Trudeau government. So this thing, was progressing through the Senate, but senators said, okay, well, we should also address the other elephant in the room, which is, of course, the second generation cutoff. This is a policy that limits who has Indian status to people who had either both their parents had status or both their grandparents had status. Some First Nations said because of this rule, they may lose all their status members in the years and decades ahead. So the Senate took it upon themselves, spoke to Indigenous communities, spoke to First Nations, to put forward a amendment to S2 that would change that to a one-parent rule. So if one of your parents had status, you would qualify. This drew the ire of the government, who said we actually need to be talking to First Nations, in a more robust consultative format before we do something as sweeping as this. And Indigenous Service Minister Mandy Gall-Masty, said that the Senate basically threw a bit of a wrench in these very, very delicate conversations when we asked her about this last month. So now we're in a bit of a standoff. The bill has now moved to the House of Commons. It will not be dealt with at committee this week. The House is not sitting until is off next week and won't come back until mid-April. So the question is, well, now we're under a time crunch. The court ruling in 2025 gave you 10 months to address the enfranchise concerns, and now this bill is moving way too slowly through Parliament. So what we reported on yesterday is news that the government looks like they're going to ask the court for an extension. We don't know how long that could be. We don't know if they're actually going to go ahead with that. It seems very likely. A court hearing is slated on April 21st to hear the government's application if it does decide to proceed. The concern with that is, well, we don't necessarily know what the government is planning in terms of a timeline to wrap up their consultations and actually put forward their proposal to deal with the second generation cutoff. They said, we're going to run our own consultations. We're going to talk to communities. We're going to talk to rights holders. They're hoping to start consultations later this year. But again, it's not quite clear when they would put forward a legislative package to address those concerns. They do say they're totally acknowledging that is a problem. Second generation cutoff is something that we do need to address. We just need some more time to deal with it. The concern is, all those changes that we talked about, the S2 and the second generation cutoff, not only were they supported by all the senators, they were supported by all the opposition parties in Parliament. What do we know is happening next month? We're going to have 3 really, really consequential by-elections. So what happens there if the Liberals go 2 for 3 or 3 for 3 on that night? They now have a majority in the House of Commons. That means they don't need a partner, any opposition party, to partner with them to pass legislation. So by kicking this down the can and avoiding a court-imposed, a rapidly approaching court-imposed deadline, is the government basically trying to take a kneel here and wait until they have enough seats to have a majority to pass their version of S2 and not have to worry about opposition in the Senate or opposition from MPs of opposition stripes. I think it's a dynamic and interesting development. We'll have to see what actually happens. The court, of course, does not have to agree to provide this deadline, but that would create a really, really complicated scenario because this bill, S2, still needs to go through committee, but it's not next in line. It's not currently in line, I should say, for committee review. There's a separate bill that's right before the committee right now. And the interesting part is the minister's office saying, look, we can't tell the committee what to do. They usually deal with bills based on when they get referred to them. The previous bill, the bill that they're dealing with right now was referred to them on February 26th. S-2, which was passed in December and is a government bill, was referred to them on February 27th. I'm not going to imply any conspiracies here, but the timing is very, very, very interesting. So we'll have to see what happens here. Of course, iPolitics will have you covered. Please read the story on the website and let us know what you think. One thing that I thought was really interesting in this debate over the second generation cutoff is, Montreal Canadiens goaltending great Carey Price actually wrote to the committee in the fall saying, because of this rule, I can't register my kids for status. And then he sent an email urging the senators to make changes to the policy as a result. So that's also included in the story. Please take a look at it. Reach out to us with any questions or comments. This is a very complicated topic and piece of legislation. So we're happy to fill you in on all the information. Thanks. Have a great one.